count to.
I'll give you a thumbs up in 10 seconds.
Yeah.
Jean Marie and Phil, we're just queuing up for YouTube here.
Sure.
Thank you. Okay, thanks. Just wait for Tom to step down. Ready?
Yep, we're good.
Great.
I'm good. Yep.
Welcome, everyone. I'd like to call to order the January 20th, 2022 Ordinance Committee meeting. And with that, Tracy, I wonder if you could do our roll call, please.
Councilor Johnson,
Here.
Councilor Katarina,
Here.
Councilor Hamel.
Here.
Thank you.
We'll begin with the approval of the minutes. So if everybody, could please turn to those if you have a chance. And if there are any comments or revisions about these.
No, I motion that we accept.
Okay, and
I'll second that.
okay, and I would, before I take the vote, I would just say there were a couple of typos. Senior tax deferment should be deferment, I think, or deferral. And then reconstruction of non-confining structures, that should be non-conforming structures in a section of the minutes there. So with those revisions, any further discussion?
No, so I'm okay with putting it forward with those revisions you suggested. Yep.
Thank you. And a second for the revised motion?
What if I say no? No.
Then we're good for ours.
Well, then you can
Yes.
second it.
Yes, yes, it's fine.
Thank you. And with that, can you do the vote, please,
Councilor
Tracy?
Johnson,
Yes.
Councilor Katarina,
Yes.
Councilor Hamel.
Yes, that's approved unanimously. Thank you, everyone. So we have 3 agenda items this evening. Discussion of the Chapter 1007 Cable TV Ordinance, discussion of Chapter 405 Zoning Ordinance concerning manufactured housing, and Chapter 500 Trailers and Trailer Camps. And then finally, we'll make a brief reference to the Growth Management Ordinance 7F. Are there any adjustments?
Mr. Chair, I thought we were
Yes.
discussing that.
We are, but I'd just like to introduce it before you dismiss it when we get to it. It'll
Okay.
be very brief.
All
Thank you,
right.
if you allow. Thank you. Are there any other suggestions for revisions to the agenda? Okay, with that, I think we're gonna turn it over to Liam Gallagher and Phil Saucier, who gave us some background on the cable TV ordinance. So Liam, over to you, please. Thank you.
Sure, I'm happy to look right at Phil. I know that this is just the brief background. I believe that there are some proposed changes that Phil and Town Manager Tom Hall have been discussing as a precursor to perhaps a new cable TV franchise agreement. Beyond that, I'm gonna defer to Phil on the discussion.
Yeah, thank you. So I was asked to, I assume you have a copy of this proposed ordinance in your packet. I did not draft this ordinance, but the Greater Portland Council of Governments had engaged a consultant who works in this area to draft a model ordinance.
Phil, can I just correct that? We haven't shared the draft ordinance yet. I think that our hope that for tonight was just to introduce the item in terms of what's going on, what the need is, and then bring it forward in a future agenda item for.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure. But as I was saying, so the Greater Portland Council of Governments had engaged a consultant to assist all of the member communities with Greater Portland Council of Governments with a model cable ordinance, with a consulting firm or a law firm out of Minnesota. Some of these are federal in nature, some of these issues, so the sort of federal law. And so that's what will be introduced apparently at the next meeting. I did take a look at it without reinventing the wheel, and for the most part had really no changes. It's a very comprehensive ordinance. I did suggest one or two edits that did not seem to be consistent with main law, and they were fairly minor. Had to do subscriber cancellation provisions in a couple other areas, but otherwise I thought it was in good shape. The background here is that under main law, before a municipality engages with a cable franchise agreement, it must have an ordinance in place. So it's a precursor to an ordinance, and the town has an ordinance, but it's a fairly modest one, is the best way I'd put it. It doesn't have a lot of meat on the bones, if you will. And the statutes have been updated over the last couple of years, and there's now a state model franchise agreement. So there's a lot sort of that has happened, I think, since the last time the town has looked at its ordinance. This is much more robust, is what I'll say. So without getting into the details, because you haven't seen it yet, but it incorporates both state law and federal law. And so at this point, I think it's in pretty good shape based with a few tweaks that I have suggested that you'll see in the future.
Mr.
Chairman?
Chair, Mr.
Oh.
Chair, can I ask a question?
Yes.
Real quickly? How come we don't have the new one to look at? What are we waiting on? Because I got nothing to respond to without knowing what we're talking about.
You don't, I'll speak to that. I'd asked the town attorney to look at this. I should kind of preface, we along with other GPCOG communities commissioned or hired an attorney to assist us really ultimately to renegotiate our franchise agreement with Spectrum. And as Phil mentioned, a prerequisite for that is to have an ordinance in place. Ours is, I think, vintage 1986. So it's quite modest and antiquated. Just imagine what menu of services cable providers now provide that they did in 1986. So the end goal is to ultimately renegotiate our franchise agreement. I asked Phil to speak to this only because I knew he was present today, and our intention is to bring back this formally before the committee at your next meeting if you're willing.
Okay, I was just curious because it's kind of weird to be talking about something I've never seen. So
Yeah.
thank you.
So just to be fair here, we needed some, time for the wind up on this, number one. Number two, we didn't really have it listed as an action item. That's a discussion item. So we are going to a little slow wading into this. So apologies for that. But I'm quite confident that the next time around we'll have the specific details to speak to. One question I did have though for Tom, and I'd welcome other questions from my fellow counselors, but there was I know we have a cable TV committee, and there was some discussion at one time about potentially disbanding the committee or somehow combining it with some other unit. So could you help us with the status of cable TV? I know it's been superseded by some levels of technology. So maybe Tom, you could help us with that, please.
Yeah, the Cable TV Advisory Committee, I think as it's officially called, has been relatively dormant, if not entirely dormant, during my entire tenure here. It does have some responsibilities related to administration and compliance relative to the franchise agreement. But historically, it's really been used to create programming and content around the PEG channels. This is the public access, it's the channel that we're broadcasting this meeting on. That's historically been their role. So I think it is high time we do take a look back at that charge, either disband them or change the charge significantly to make them relevant again.
Okay. Thanks, Tom. Any other questions or comments about that?
Yeah, I have a quick question regarding that. Does anyone do any programming on, and when I say anyone, number one, either in Scarborough or elsewhere, that's not like your meetings and whatnot now on the cable TV? Because I know back in the old days, you could watch, I think Judy Roy had some show on that she would interview people or this or that or the other thing. Or has that gone by the wayside, or was that part of the mandate, public mandate or something? I'm just curious about that, because that would tie into this the committee that's been in existence forever.
No, you're quite right. It's been some time since any kind of original local content's been produced. On occasion, we'll televise and rebroadcast sporting events that others, collect the video for. But it's been at least 10 years, if not longer, since any kind of original local content. Art Dillon in the summer concert series, there might be someone capture video there. So it's very sporadic. And community services really fills in the gap. You'll see there's a number of static slides that have counselor contact information, some of which is probably outdated on occasion. Other community services, kind of public service announcements and programming announcements. But there's not much there, let's be honest.
Paul Johnson.
It's actually a good time to announce, Councilor Hamel and I have started Good Morning Scarborough. It will air on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday mornings.
And our
And
goal,
we're actually starting production tomorrow. So
You know that, Dawn?
you think I'm kidding, but we're doing it.
And I see you're wearing the matching shirts in honor of that.
we're back again, and our goal is to try to exceed the number of viewers for last night's town council.
Get right. We're trying to get 7 viewers. 7 viewers.
Oh, my God.
Don't forget to tune in. Good Morning Scarborough, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday.
Oh, Dawn, by the way, I'm sorry, I'm going way off task here and get everyone in trouble. I did bring a new mask in for you last night, but I gave it to Tom.
I heard, I'm sorry
Anyway,
that I missed
put
you
your
and the
mask on.
mask. I'll be looking for it at the next meeting. Thank you.
Sorry,
So-
Phil, we're misbehaving.
Thank you.
That's okay.
So are there any other comments from town staff or the counselors on this one, other than for us to have this as an agenda item, an action item for our February ordinance committee meeting?
That'd be great.
Okay, thank you. All right, second agenda item is discussion chapter 405 zoning ordinance, manufactured housing, and chapter 500 trailers and trailer camps. So again, I'd look to Liam and to Phil on this for the windup, and we'll have some discussion. Thank you.
Phil, I'm happy to push this one right back to you. I think you could do the introduction. I think you did introduce this item a number of meetings ago as something that is a bit, can be a bit complicated. There's some relationship between the two chapters. And I think that it's been long out of where it needs to be. So hopefully you can spend some time today articulating what needs to be done and some recommendations to move forward.
Thank you. And just to make sure, do you have a copy of my memo?
Yeah.
Okay. So this, I think we did have an initial conversation about this, and this came about some counselors and then also town staff had identified that this ordinance was outdated and needed a look. It also came up, and I don't know if Jay is here, but it also comes up from time to time, the regulation of manufactured housing. And in a sense that there are a state law provision, I'm going to go over that very briefly with you. State law provision in our current zoning ordinance is sometimes in conflict with state law. And so we get questions from time to time on that in Scarborough. In fact, it goes back at least until 1990. A letter from my former colleague, my mentor, Chris Vaniotis, had identified back in 1990 with the Crystal Springs Trailer Park some conflict that still is there today, but in the ordinance and state law. So here we are 2 years later, and there's an opportunity to clean that up. As an initial matter, just starting with this ordinance itself, the trailer, get the right terminology here, trailer and trailer camps. So that terminology itself is outdated. So we don't use that term anymore. There's a manufactured housing statute in a couple of them in state law. And these should now be called mobile homes or mobile home parks as they're actually formally known and regulated, quite frankly, at the state level. So, and then under the terminology manufactured housing, there's two types. There's manufactured housing and mobile homes, essentially. So what you think of as the sort of prefab housing, which is regulated separately, and then what you think of as what used to be called trailers, for lack of a better way of putting it. Those are all sort of a type of manufactured housing. So that's just a background. But this ordinance itself does a number of things. A lot of it is fairly old, quite frankly. I mean, even the terminology, it was really seems like it was put into place from a real sort of public health and safety perspective, basically, to ensure that there were safe and places to live. But we have regulations around that, both the state and local level, so they're redundant. I did point out, so my initial conversation, I had conversations with staff, was maybe we just eliminate the whole thing. There's duplicative regulations to the extent that we want to regulate already in the zoning ordinance. But there were two provisions that I thought you may want to consider pulling out, either keeping here in a much sort of more focused ordinance or pulling out and putting somewhere else. And one is you do require licenses currently for mobile homes called trailers in the ordinance. And so you may want to consider continuing with that process. And I didn't hear any discussion about wanting to eliminate that. So that's in this ordinance. So you'd want to keep that. And then also these mobile home park regulations, these can simply be updated and moved over to the zoning ordinance as a new performance standard for mobile home parks, which does not currently exist. So I would propose not eliminating these sections 5, 6, and 7, which deal with some compliance issues, regulations, but moving that and making a new performance standard over the zoning ordinance. The licensing can either be a standalone mobile home licensing ordinance, or you could put it in another licensing ordinance. But otherwise, I would repeal this whole ordinance with those two exceptions. Do you have any questions about this before I move on to the zoning?
Any questions? I don't have any on that particular point, but.
I think it's a newbie question, sorry. Can we do the licensing just in a schedule of fees, or does that have to be nested inside of an ordinance, or can we? Just
you'd need an ordinance to give yourself, you need an ordinance to give yourself the authority to require
Okay,
licensing.
Frankly, I'm fine with that. I can see rewriting what we've got, because when you read the old ordinance, it sounds like something from the 1940s for sure, or 50s.
Right.
So I would like to definitely update that. I agree with leaving licensing. I mean, I know in the real estate world, mobile homes and manufactured housing, as opposed to modular housing, isn't real estate. It's like a car or anything else. It depreciates over time. So there is a real difference here. So I think that it's legit, to do licensing, so to speak, on it. I don't think there's any issue with that. Plus, we do, when you're building stick built or anything else, you're charging, construction fee, permit fees, whatever. So, I think keeping that makes really good sense. And I did note that you did have something about tiny homes here, which I think is really good to have also for us to look at, particularly, again, here we go. Jean Marie's been spending a lot of time recently, particularly with the legislative end of it, on, housing alternatives for folks and more affordable housing. And tiny homes can certainly be that. So I definitely would like to see something somewhere that allows for that use. But we can talk more about it, whether it's accessory or whatever. So.
Okay, thank you. Thanks for the comments. I'd like to ask if there are any other ideas here that people would like to incorporate. It does seem to me that clearly a need for us to update the language, clearly a desire to retain and improve the ordinance, clearly an interest in allowing us to continue to license but we haven't really talked about expansion, and I'd like to talk a little bit more about the tiny homes, if we could, in terms of what input. I'd like to get input from town staff, but also, does it make sense for us to try to get input from operators, from the folks that are that own and operate the parks today? So,
Well, wouldn't we get that as part of the process? If you're putting a new ordinance in, you're going to have hearings and readings and people weighing in. And they can come to the ordinance meetings when we, introduce language. I guess where do we start? I mean, who drafts this and then work from there is how I would look at this.
Great points. For that, we have a technical expert and process expert, Jay Chase, who's at the podium, so it's happy to help us. Thank you. Thanks, Jay.
Thank you very much. Jay Chase, Planning Director. Jean Marie, I was thinking along the same lines you were, knowing that this afternoon's meeting was really the start of a discussion to get an understanding of generally where the ordinance committee wants to go with this. My thought might be that as we move forward, I could work with Phil Saucier in starting to draft some language. And, I think what I was hearing Ms. Katerina say, it might make sense to invite, we only have a few mobile home parks in town with a few key players, if you will. And so once that language is drafted and it comes back to your next agenda, if you think it appropriate, we could certainly reach out to them directly. So we have, pretty clear direct contact with those folks, if that's the will of the committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Jay. So with that, are we comfortable with handing the laboring oar over to Jay? And then, do you think this is something you could bring back to the next month's meeting, or are you going to need more time?
Phil, help me answer that one. What do you?
I want to be respectful of you guys.
I think so from my perspective. I mean, so that's, do you usually like to have it at least a week ahead of time? So that like a 3-week turnaround, or is it?
3
Okay.
weeks.
So we
I
have
think
about
so.
3 weeks from now to when we'd be looking to post the agenda. Yeah, I think the direction that Phil set forth in his memo, I think he provides pretty good direction. So, if there's anything that you'd like to see us take a different course on, that would certainly be helpful out of this discussion. But I think from there, Phil and I could work
Thanks, Jay.
in those couple of weeks.
Paul Johnson had a comment.
Yeah, I just want to make sure, just because I don't want to lose the thread of, we're essentially telling these guys we support eliminating the ordinance as is and embedding the new language where it belongs, essentially. So I just want to make sure that
Right.
we're all on the same page, that that's what we're telling these guys to do. And so, our next step would be to essentially repeal the entire ordinance as is, and then make more robust and within our existing ordinance. So,
Repeal and replace.
yeah, or update existing, I think is the better.
Okay.
Yeah.
So
Phil, I have that right, correct? I just want to make sure.
That's right. Yep, that's right, Councilor Johnson. The idea was, and we explicitly tried to do this, was not really to make a wholesale policy changes here.
Right,
It was to update, it was to eliminate redundancies or outdated terminology, move regulations to the appropriate place, and ensure that it's in compliance with state law. There were two things I did want to just point out when you have the opportunity that gets closer to policy, but still it was an attempt to clean up, if you will. This is a good time.
okay. So, and Jay spoke to the idea of getting input from operators.
Yes.
Well, what process would we like to follow as a committee to make sure we're doing that around tiny homes? Because I know this is a relatively new concept. I mean, it sounds like the state's already decided it for us, so it's not much for us to do other than probably include it. But what's the sentiment on that?
And Phil, is the tiny homes one of the two areas you're saying is getting close to policy making?
No, it's not, but I do want to
Okay.
talk about it briefly, just to give people an update on that law.
Okay.
No, there's a state law on that now.
I guess the only thing.
Jay's up at the podium.
I guess the only thing I would offer, I'll certainly talk with our code officers, but tiny homes it's more of a one-off conversation with individuals, where mobile homes, like I said, we know who those providers are. They come in annually, get their licenses, and it's a much clearer audience of 2 or 3 folks. Tiny homes, I think, as Phil can explain it much better than I can, the state has sort of cast the die. And what we're really looking to do is just make it clear in our ordinance that the state has said this is, let's get it in our zoning ordinance so that people don't have to go pouring through state statute, which good luck doing that if you think our zoning's hard enough.
Right.
Try to make it just a little cleaner. So we can certainly talk about that and think about that some more, but I'll let Phil sort of talk about what those changes are.
Mr. Chair, can I ask
Yes.
a question of Jay?
Yes,
Jay, if you don't mind. People who want to put mobile homes on land, not in a park, where is that regulated?
Phil, you want to help me? This
I'm
is part
sorry.
of what we're trying to clear up. So Phil, do you have a good handle on that at this point?
Could you just restate that again, Jean Marie?
Yeah, people frequently in this state, and I haven't seen it in Scarborough, at least not in quite a while, will buy a lot of land and then they put a mobile home on it to live in, or or whatever you want to call it, not a modular, but the manufactured housing. Do we have something in our zoning about that? How do we regulate that?
Okay, so that's
thought
actually a
about
good
that.
question. Yeah, no, that's a good question, and is actually one of the policy areas I was going to mention. So under state law, remember we talked, there's two types of manufactured housing. There's mobile homes
Right.
and there's modulars. What the state law says as it relates to modular homes,
Yeah,
we have to allow modular homes
That's
to
right.
be erected at any place that single family homes are allowed.
that's
So
correct.
we have to treat them like a single family home,
Well,
no
that's 'cause
no
they're real-
differences.
Well, they're real estate.
That's right.
Modular
And so
houses,
we
real
don't really talk about that in our ordinance. We don't really have that one of the things I want to do is clean up some terminology because we don't talk, we
Cool.
talk about manufactured housing, but what it really means is mobile homes. And so we want to clean that up.
Right,
So that's one thing. And we don't talk about it. We can make that clear, but it's already state law. On the mobile home section, what the state law says is we just have to allow mobile homes to be placed in some areas of town,
okay,
essentially. Not every place. It says in a number, we have to allow manufactured housing generally to be placed or erected on individual house lots in a number of locations in undeveloped areas where single family homes are allowed in town. That's broader. So we have more regulation. What I sort of found is it relates to mobile homes. You actually only allow them in one district currently. That likely suffices for state law.
okay,
And you only allow them right now in the RFM district.
right, okay, that's what I thought. Yep,
Yeah,
okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
Thanks, Phil. And here Jay has something else to add. Thanks.
And I just wanted, because this really does get a little bit wonky and it's a hard path to follow, but Phil, can you just speak to a little bit about, because we're talking now about individual mobile homes, but mobile home parks are something else. We allow those,
Right.
if I remember correctly. Phil, again, help me out here, in
Yes.
both the RF and the RFM. So there is a bit of a distinction as to mobile homes on an individual lot and then in parks. And that's all part of the stew we're trying to make.
That's right. That's
sense
right.
here.
And one of the areas where we need to make sure we're consistent with state law and gets actually back to that 1990 letter is that we are limited on how we can regulate mobile home parks. So under state law, we can't, for example, require the same single family home lot size requirements on a park, because obviously it wouldn't work and it would be a way to regulate them out of your town.
Right.
So what the legislature has decided as a policy decision, mobile home parks are regulated differently. We can't, for example, require mobile home park lots, meaning the individual sites, to be larger than the smaller 6,500 square feet. Or if we have a smaller area in town for single family homes, that's the limit. So we can't say 30,000 square feet per site, for example. There are other things. I don't want to get into the weeds on this one yet, but there are other things like setbacks and road sizes and all these different things that were prohibited from over regulating, if you will. So that's one of the areas that we need to put in. The final one I'll mention is expansions of existing mobile home parks. This is actually the area where it's come up a couple different times in the last 5 years or so. Under state law, we have to allow mobile home parks to be expanded or developed in a number of places in town. And this statute actually went up to the law court at one point in the town of Wells.
Mm.
And the town of Wells did not have any language that would allow non-conforming parks to expand in their current location. And the law court said that ordinance was invalid because of this statute. So if we have a legally non-conforming park, and we do in Scarborough, meaning that they're not, I believe so, right, Jay, that there's some parks in some areas that wouldn't be allowed today.
Correct.
Then we have to allow some reasonable expansion. There's not a lot of detail around that, but that's something that Jay and I can work on. And right now, the only mechanism we have in our ordinance to deal with that, knowing the state law provision, is that there is a miscellaneous appeal provision. The Board of Appeals can grant expansions of non-conforming uses of land. And so we've sort of had people go in that direction, but we may just want to think about that a little bit more, make it more explicit that that's, for example, doesn't mention that in that provision. But that's one of the things we'll need to work on in terms of language and address.
And to just sort of help land that conversation and think of it in what we have in town, the Pinecrest Mobile Home Park community that's really sort of access behind the Portland Volvo off Route 1, really access through South Portland, quite frankly,
Right.
did get a recent expansion approval through that special exception process as an expansion of a non-conforming use. I think we've had ongoing conversations with Crystal Springs community. Folks may have been up through there and noticed that there's a new owner who's doing a lot of work up there, and he has interest in doing an expansion. But as of right now, as Phil just mentioned, the RF zoning only allows 1 unit per 2 acres, which is inconsistent with what state law would have us do. So, I've had a conversation. It was actually sort of good timing. As I was having the conversation with him, the ordinance committee started to at least talk about this a little bit in the fall. And I said, well, I think things are going to start to move here. So just to help ground it a little bit locally as to what's happening as well.
Thank you. Any other comments or questions?
Mm-mm.
So it sounds like for both of those agenda items, we'll look forward to the staff to come back with proposed language, and we'll move this along as far as we can, in the next meeting, recognizing it might take a little bit longer for the manufactured homes one or the cable TV one. Does that sound reasonable?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. And then there's only one other agenda item before we confirm those agenda items in a vote here for action items next time. But I had placed on the agenda, and we'd kind of gone back and forth a little bit, a request from Chairman Clucci for us to take a look at 7F section of the growth management ordinance, as well as potentially the contract zone process language for possible revisions associated with the pending exemption request from the Downs that might relate to the application process. So I think the consensus or the feedback I had from Councilors Johnson and Katerina were for us to postpone this indefinitely, and just want to confirm that understanding and see if there's anything further you'd like to add. Paul.
No, I think that's accurate. I think we wrote this GMO provision, the 7F provision, for all intents and purposes, was written by counselors with the help of staff, but we drove the bus. And I think this is an example of we're living through it for the first time. So I actually think this is a really good conversation. I think we need to have it, but I think we just should finish living through one complete cycle and then look back and say, hey, what do we wish, how do we refine that? How do we make that process easier for everybody?
Yeah.
I think we all have some ideas immediately, but I'm of the mind, let's get it done. Let's go through it. We clearly can't change the rules of the game for these guys in the middle of it anyways.
Right.
And then let's go back and have a reflective exercise, which I think will be very fruitful. I think we're probably 2 to 3 months a little bit early for this. So, but yes, totally agree with everything you just said. Yep.
Yeah, and Paul said exactly what I'm thinking too. I also did talk to Chairman Clucci, and he agrees that it's premature. So.
Great. So we're all in agreement, and we had fun batting that back and forth this past week.
Yes, we
So
did.
thank you. It's good fun. Good fun. Thank you. So this perhaps would be a good time to see if there is any. Well, let's see. Well, let's just confirm those agenda items then. So do I have a motion to confirm that we will revisit chapter 1007 cable TV ordinance and chapter 405 zoning ordinance, manufactured housing, and chapter 500 trailers and trailer camps, incorporating the discussion and suggestions that we've covered in the meeting, and look forward to staff work taking as far as we can go on this at the next meeting. Those
So
two
moved.
agenda items.
Second.
Can you take the vote, please, Tracy?
Yep.
Council Katerina,
Yes,
Council Hamel,
Yes, that's unanimous. And here, and I think that we have I just want to make a mention that there were some other things we had on the list. We had a fairly long conversation in the first meeting of the year. There were other issues that we had identified, including street frontage or corner lots, standard replacement or reconstruct. We talked about the non-conforming structures, daycare, family daycare, group daycare. So there are things like this, but here again, I'm going to defer to staff to help us prioritize those in terms of importance and how heavy a lift or light a lift they may be. So, but.
Yeah, and Mr. Chair,
Yeah.
just a reminder that not everything needs to start at ordinance either. If they're minor changes or whatever, they can go directly to council. But again, I would lean on staff on that one to see what their thoughts were.
Okay. There was one suggestion also that I had from my notes and it were in the minutes about rules and policies, possibly considering the issue of, formalizing permission to attend and speak at public meetings.
No,
That was in the minutes and we decided not to do that.
as chair of rules and policies, no, I don't think we need to do that, but
So that's a pretty
I
short.
welcome your opinion later.
I love it when you just put the marker down. Thank you.
Hey, why
I don't
mess
believe you.
around?
I don't believe you. I'm just making my plug to revisit the caretaker fees for marijuana. Caretaker
No,
licensing
that's a
fees.
no. You
Well,
wouldn't
as
like-
someone who's speaking directly to the chair who could put it on the agenda, I would like to just make a plug to revisit medical marijuana caretaker licensing fees that are
Okay.
exorbitant and detrimental to the small business owner.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
well, I got news feed. No, I just spent 6 hours with the Maine Municipal Legislative Committee. I'll tell you, I think at least half, if not 3/4 of everything we talked about had to do with marijuana. So stay tuned.
So I'd say rather than wrestle that one to the ground in this meeting, why don't we?
It was just my plug for future meetings.
Oh,
I'm not-
okay,
yeah,
there we
yeah,
go.
yeah.
He's
That's-
just,
So
putting
we-
in his.
I thought you were just mentioning things that are in the
yeah,
pipeline.
things that are in the pipeline. I think that's all for now, except for public comment.
Yeah, you got a couple people here. I
We do.
think. Someone has your hand up.
Go ahead, Marvin. You should be all set.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, thanks. Marvin Gates, 423 Black Point Road. Quick question about item 6 and your discussion. I understand it's tabled. It was indicated that we are living through this process. And I thought I heard that perhaps in 2 to 3 months, you might revisit this item. My question was, how long is this living through process? If that's, if you understand that, how long?
Thanks, Marvin. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. So the downs, when the GMO was revised, the GMO in general, Marvin, I think you're a close watcher of this, but the GMO was made quite restrictive throughout town. And then there was an exemption process created for the high growth areas. The downs are the first people to come to us for that exemption process. That exemption process is this 7F. So their current application, which by the way, they have submitted that is formally in front of us, they're walking through the 7F process to ask for an exemption. So what I think where we are is we're probably a third of the way through that process right now. And I already know a couple things that I would like to change, but let's finish that process with them, look back on it and say, what would we change? That's what living through the process meant. I can tell you, if it's of keen interest of you, I know on February 6th or February 7th, they're probably going to submit some sort of revised application to us, or let's say maybe an amendment to it or revised application to us. So we're essentially waiting for them to do some homework and come back to us. That answer, I'm sorry, that was long-winded, but I hope that made sense.
Marvin, are you okay with that?
Very much so. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Thanks for joining. And I guess we've got Allison Bristol. Allison, you want to speak? And if not, that's okay too. So With that, I would welcome a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn. So moved.
Seconded,
Counselor Johnson,
yes.
Counselor Katarina,
Yes.
Counselor Hamel,
Yes.